welcome you in. It's so good to be together again. If you're in pain, trouble, or doubt, let the love come in to help the hurting get out. Open your heart to share how you feel, and we'll build a love of church that is real. Open the door, step right inside. Come into this place where love and hope will abide. Reach out your hand, I'll welcome you in. It's so good to be together again. And reach out your hand, I'll welcome you in. It's so good to be together again.
And good morning and welcome. It is good to be together once again. And on behalf of Amanda Pressler and myself, we welcome you to our third Zoom church. You know, it's kind of interesting, sort of losing track of what we had planned and what we're doing now. And I recognized the other day that one of the things that Amanda and I had planned to do on this Sunday was honor our very own Joe Robb. Now, I'm sure Joe is still asleep right now, but we'll forgive him because on May the 1st, Joe turns 18. And also next month, we know that Joe, like a lot of graduating seniors, should be graduating from Edison High School. And so we just wanted to wish Joe a really special moment of celebration to honor all the work he's done. He's turned out to be a fine young man that we've had the privilege of watching him grow up from, I think he was 2 when he first started to come to the church. And he's an awesome musician, and we just wanted to take a little moment to kind of go back to some of the things that we'd planned to do and to honor Joe this morning. So with that, let's come together in a time of prayer to celebrate the fellowship, the friendship, the wonderful connections that we have in our spiritual community. So let us begin by a time of introspection and prayer. Let go of distractions. Listen for your heart. Listen to the beat of the tune of life. Breathe fully. Close your eyes and relax. If we are truly to move through these difficult times, we must learn and practice the art of being still. When you breathe in peace. When you breathe out peace. Again, when you breathe in peace. When you breathe out love. In the quiet moment, we are more fully able to attend to the holy within as we come together in this time of prayer. And though we're not sitting side by side, we know that one source, one life connects us all. And there is no one outside the sacred circle of divine love. All is one. There is only one presence and one power in the universe and in my life, God, the good. I invite you to remind yourself of this truth as we affirm together that there is only one presence and one power in the universe and in my life, God, the good. There is still joy. Even in these rapidly changing and uncertain times, there is still joy. For joy is not contingent upon outer experiences. Joy is the expression of peace and love, dancing in the light of life's pulse. and through our lives, there is still joy. It is a phase that we continually need to remind ourselves of. For when we reflect upon joy, we begin to see it in the world around us, drawing us deeper into the experience of oneness. The song of the carefree robin, the dancing of raindrops on the pavement, the glimmers of light breaking upon the early morning darkness, as if playing a game of hide and seek, the laughter of children. There is still joy. When we turn our attention from the troubles of the world, the inner turmoil that life can bring us, we open the window of the soul to the vast treasure house of inner well-being. To embrace the flow is to know the stillness, the very source of our strength and courage to make it through these times as the world gives birth. As we sit in silence, let us affirm, there is still joy. Today, as we go about the daily of our lives, may we pause in the moments when we hear the robin sing and remind ourselves that his song is simply one of joy. No matter what, there still is joy. Thank you, God. Amen.
I speak only love, love, love. I speak only love from the morning's first light to the last star at night. Let my words speak only love. Peace, peace. I speak only peace. Peace, peace. Speak only peace from the morning's first light to the last star at night. Let my words speak only peace from the morning's first light to the last star at night. Let my words speak only peace.
Thank you, Amanda. Last Sunday was Easter Sunday. And so Easter Sunday really is the end of the season of Lent. And during our Lenten times, we normally have a Bible study, a gospel study of some nature. And we've been looking at the Gospel of Mark. Well, even though Easter may be over and Lent may be over, we're not quite done with the Gospel of Mark because we left off at the climactic moment of the story. So in order to understand the way Mark ended his story, we need to remind ourselves of what Mark was doing as a literist, as an author, the way he crafted his story about the life and times of Jesus and the message of Jesus is so important for us in order to be able to really grasp what he was drawing, what focus he had at the very end of his gospel. So we said last Sunday, where we left off, is that Mark, in a masterful way, wove together in an intersection of what I'm going to call the tradition of the teachings of Jesus, which would have been the early disciples, those who walked in the Sea of Galilee with him, those who were there. And at the other side of the spectrum was what I call the kind of the Pauline concept of talk about the risen Christ and the crucified one, which had more to do with sort of an opening of Jesus into a world of mysticism and to be the Messiah. And so what happened was, in those final moments, in chapter 15 that we looked at last Sunday, Mark masterfully binds those two traditions forever. I can't help but wonder, what did Christianity look like in 50 CE in Mark's community? We believe that Mark was writing around probably 65 to 70. He didn't do it overnight. And that there was a whole contingent of people, probably either in Rome or in Ephesus, but we know he was in a Greek-speaking Gentile world in which he was addressing. So one wonders what that belief was. It was a little bit of this from the gospel tradition. I can see where it makes reasonable sense. It was a little bit of this and it was a little bit of this, and everybody had a story about Jesus. But the problem Mark saw was that they were getting more excited about telling the story of Jesus than living the story of Jesus. Now remember, it's 40 years after Jesus has died. The chances of someone being in Mark's community who actually was there, walked with Jesus, was on the Sea of Galilee, witnessed his miracles, listened to his teaching, is really, really slim. So in other words, when a story gets told repeatedly and repeatedly, what happens is the story grows with the telling, as we all know. And so without someone who was literally there to correct them and say, no, that's not exactly how it happens, close, but not exactly, there was no one to sort of contain the story to the truth. And the better the storyteller, the better the story would get. But Mark somehow sat sort of in the back of the room. I picture him in my mind going, this isn't what Jesus was trying to say. Jesus was trying to say, come follow me. Do as I did. Be followers of the way, not followers of Jesus, so that you would have a richer and deeper understanding of what Jesus came to leave with the world, his legacy to the world. So the way Mark crafted his gospel is with an absolutely brilliant strategy. He knew that people that were reading the Gospels were going to automatically identify with the disciples. We talked about this last week, called narrative transference. I see myself in the role. I see myself as a disciple of Jesus. I don't ever see myself as Jesus. So he knew that if he was going to make his case here, what he was going to have to do is almost take the disciples and make them somewhat cartoonish, and in the sense that they proved to be faithless, clueless. They ran away at the hour when Jesus needed the most. They kept asking him questions. But whenever you have the fall guy, you've got to have the opposite. You've got to have sort of the quiet hero. And in Mark's gospel, the quiet hero then became the man who was blind, the Gerasene demoniac, as we saw last Sunday, the centurion. These were people who should not have understood Jesus at all. And yet, they remained faithful. Now, there's one more element that Mark weaves into his story, and it comes into high relief at the very end of the gospel. and that is the story of the women. Now, it's very interesting because women are smattered throughout the story, throughout the gospel stories, as also people who perhaps got the message more so than the disciples did. And this becomes sort of the high moment of the final act of the Gospel of Mark. Segue for a moment. Historically, we know that the Gospel of Mark ended chapter 16, verse 8. Now, for many years, people felt that the Gospel of Mark lacked something. It just didn't end on a high note. There were no resurrection stories like John had Mary Magdalene in the garden, and Luke, the disciples on the road to Emmaus, and in Matthew, Jesus appeared to the women, and Mark doesn't end that way. And so throughout the early Middle Ages, they sort of tacked on extra endings so that it would make Mark more in alignment with the other Gospels, not realizing that what they had done was unintentionally rob the Gospel of its greatest line, its greatest moment. So now, if you look in your Bible, hopefully you have a newer Bible that has great footnotes. I love good Bible footnotes, as you all know, my students. Down in the footnotes, it will tell you that it ends, that the initial ending of the Gospel of Mark was chapter 16, verse 8. What happens in chapter 16? It tells us that Jesus has died, chapter 15, that's where we left off. Jesus has died. We open the scene where Joseph of Arimathea comes to claim the body. Pilate wants to know that he's dead. The Roman centurion said, yes, in fact, I was there. I know that he is. He gives the body, or gives permission to Joseph of Arimathea to bury the body. And while Joseph is hastily preparing the body, because it's almost sundown, two women are standing off to the side, Mary of Magdala and Mary, the mother of James and Salome. And they make a pact with each other, and they said, okay, when Sabbath is over, we are going to come back and we're going to give Jesus a proper burial. The scene reopens with now it is morning, and the two women at early daylight are coming with herbs and spices and cloth. And they're a little concerned here because they're coming to this tomb that had a huge rock in front of it. And they were like, how are we going to get this rock open? Well, as they turn the corner, they see that the rock is moved away. You have to think that they would wonder, just as human beings, do we get the right tomb? Are we at the right place? So they continued a little more hesitantly until they walked into the tomb, and there, on what would have been the slab where Jesus had been laid, was a man in white linen. And he tells them that the man that you seek, Jesus of Nazareth, is not here. He has been raised. Go and tell his disciples and Peter that he will meet them in Galilee. And here's those final words. And the women left the tomb fearful and told no one. The women left the tomb and told no one. Can you think of Mark reading this book? His whole community has been waiting every chapter that he got written. Oh man, today's the day we're going to hear the last chapter. Mark's already told us this is the last chapter. And Mark comes to that line, the women told no one. He closes the book and says, that's it. I'm sure the community looked around at each other like, what was that? That's it? That's it? They're looking at each other going, that's it? How can that be it? So the question is, what is Mark trying to say? We must remember, from all that we've discovered as Mark as an author, nothing was just thrown in there. The women weren't just thrown into the story as an unintentional sort of, well, who am I going to have to roll it? Oh, I'll throw the women in there. No, no. Mark intentionally has the women at the tomb. And all other gospels follow suit. Now, this is intriguing to me because the early communities, and I'm talking about the various earliest communities, in the 30s, 40s, 50s, women were given a position and a preeminence because the churches or the gatherings, we can't even really call them churches at this point, were held in the home. And what we know about women in antiquity is that, in a way, you could call them managers of a production unit. It's not a home like we think of today. In other words, men would go out and they would bring in the harvest. Well, not only did she have to grind the flour, she had to save the seed. She had to manage ahead, thinking we need this much seed for next year, and this will make this, and this will not be preserved. This has to be preserved, and the only preservative we have is salt. Do we have enough salt? Do we have enough left over for clothing? So she managed, if you will, a whole production unit. And by that fact, we do know from what we call non-canonical sources that there were women who were wealthy. Some of them, of course, were born into wealth and had wealth. Some of them were left in charge of their families, their farms, their communities when husbands were in the military. So they had to take care of the farm and all of its income and expenses. They weren't just said, well, I'll pay the bills when I get back, honey. It may be years before they got back. And of course, some of the women were widows. And by virtue of the fact that their husbands had not come back or had died, they now were in charge of this land and this business, as well as the money that went with it. So there were women in antiquity who had some means of wealth, shall we call it, some means of freedom. Now, when I say freedom, let us not go all the way to 21st century women, certainly not. But for them and for their time, they had a certain position and a certain level of independence. In chapter 15 of Mark's story, Mark tells us that as Jesus is hanging on the cross dying, there were these same women who were watching from a distance. And it said they had ministered to him and followed him from Galilee. Folks, in this day and age, in the day and age of Jesus, we're back to certain societal norms. Now, maybe these women followed Jesus because their husbands were followers of Jesus. And he said, we're going to Jerusalem. And they said, great, we're going to go too. Or maybe from the way it's phrased that the women, ministered to him, that at some level, they sacrificed leaving their farms, their home, their community to follow Jesus and to care for him, which means that they believed in what he taught. This is an important point, I think, because it wasn't that they just thought, well, I got nothing else to do this weekend, I'll go follow Jesus. No, they supported him. They took care of him, and not only him, but of course the disciples too. So you must understand that women who had risked such a great risk must have had a belief in their heart that what he was teaching, what he was saying was so important that they were willing to risk going forward and leaving their homes and coming with him to Jerusalem. But there's another subtle layer here. I can't help but wonder if by the time of Mark's community, if there was already tension between the authority and power and story of Jesus between men and women. You know, in Galatians, Paul says very clearly, there's no more of that criteria. There's neither slave nor free, Greek nor Jew, male nor female. We're all one. Well, that brought him a lot of heartache. In 1 Corinthians, we see that the women who were in charge of the house church in Corinth, women were in charge of many of the house churches. But it didn't sit well in Corinth, and it didn't sit well in the greater community. And I can't help but wonder if subtly Mark is trying to communicate a message that, remember, the Gerasene demoniac got it, but the disciples didn't. The blind man got it, but the disciples didn't. The centurion got it, but the disciples didn't get it. And the women got it, and the disciples didn't. So those, in other words, those you look down upon are actually the ones who got it, are actually the ones who began to live the message. Because you see, when Mark stood there, closed that book, and that echoing refrain went out to the community, they told no one. The vibration had to come back. Well, then how do we know? How do we know this? If they told no one, then how do we know? But you see, the man in the tomb had given them a commission. He said, go and tell. Go and tell. My friends, the definition of an apostle is to go and tell. The women actually, and I'm not making this up fancifully, we know that the women were charged over and over again to go and tell. To go and tell the disciples. So they must have gone and told the disciples. But even more importantly than telling the world, because from the implication is they did what they were charged to do, but they didn't tell anybody else for fear. Yet the community of Mark was sitting there together for one and only reason. The women lived the transformative message they believed. Think of the power of that. They didn't have to go out and tell and tell and tell. They turned that message inside of themselves. They understood, they committed to it way long time ago before the resurrection ever happened. They committed back in Galilee and said, I get this. I don't quite understand the whole package, but I get what he's saying. It's an inside job that if I'm ever going to conquer fear, if I'm ever going to come into a fuller expression of the divine life within us, then I start with an inside job. And from my inside transformation, that's when the world will change. From Jesus's inside transformation, that's when the world changed. From any true great spiritual master, when the inside transformation happened, then the world changed. So the legacy of Christianity, although we have been taught, of course, the myth and legend of Peter and the disciples, in reality, when you read all four Gospels, the initial word was given to the women. And somehow the women took inward what the disciples took outward. Yes, you need both, that's true. But when we only go outward, which was what Mark was against to begin with, we become filled with what is my position in life and how am I supposed to, who's better than me? Remember the disciples, who's the greatest in the kingdom? See, no woman ever asked that question because they understood that in the kingdom they were equal. In the moment of that transformative awareness, they realized that they were one with all. There was no more Greek nor Jew, slave nor free, male nor female. They were all one in a common accord of these living dynamic teachings. Why is it so important that we look at Mark anew, with fresh eyes, if you will? I find it so incredibly fascinating that it was 3 months ago when I wrote all this up and I said, okay, we're going to talk about Gospel of Mark during Lent, and never even knowing much about a virus. We kind of heard about it way off in the distance someplace. And how in those months our lives have radically changed. They have literally turned upside down. And we're getting a little more comfortable with the upside downness, but we all recognize that we're not done with the kind of getting into some sort of pattern and normalcy once again, because we're still self-quarantining, we're still staying home, and we're still doing what we need to do, or what we understand is the right thing to do to lower the curve. I can't help but think that I chose also long ago this gospel, this message, because it is a timeless treasure. Mark speaks to us as he spoke to the people 2,000 years ago. Yes, the situation and the circumstances were different, but at the same time, a new world was being born. And my friends, if you haven't figured it out yet, a new world is being born right here and right now, a world like we have never seen before. We only have smattering and glimpses of it. And our job, it seems to me, during this time, so very, very important, is to name and claim this experience as a transformative journey. As we talked about last week, as our major unity teachings, as what Mark was telling his disciples, as what Winston Churchill was telling his people in the darkest hour in their history, the way we frame it, the way we name it, the way we claim it is what it will be for us. Just a few minutes ago, I saw an interesting Adobe commercial. And for those of you who don't know what Adobe is, they do all Lightroom, Photoshop, and InDesign and all kinds of design work online. And the story said, if we can't connect, we can sing. If we can't be together, we can paint. If we can't do this, we can do that. And what we can do is create. We are the participants in the creation of that new world. We are the midwives. We are the midwives of this birthing. And we have an important job and an important responsibility to see that it isn't the worst time and the worst thing that ever happened, and oh my gosh, the government, and oh this and oh that, and whatever that is about the virus. Rather, like the women, remember they were fearful. I get that. There's times when that fear comes up with me too, like, oh my gosh, how's this going to turn out? What's going to happen? When is this going to be over? I mean, I can feel that energy too. But when we tell no one and begin to honor the energies within us, we begin to feel that movement and that shift. When we begin to tap into the wellspring of the core of peace, the expression is always new life. The expression is always creation. The expression is always new birth. Mark has left us with an absolutely poignant challenge. He's telling us, don't be so smug. Don't be so sure. In a time as we are going through, the only real thing that exists, that continues to stay with us, is the journey that we take within. And when we find that solid foundation and we dwell in that solid foundation of peace, and of love. Our gift of faith and trust tells us that each step we take will then be a rippling out to the world. We're not going to fix the world first, my friends. We're going to Band-Aid it. Our job is to fix ourselves first. And from the place of that inner connection, that wellspring to our oneness, to our understanding of how we are going to be part of a new world order that will conserve resources, that will care for one another, that will be more creative than it has ever been in our history. Then and only then will the community that will come forth, this newly emerging faith, be one that is filled with more love, more joy, more peace, more life, not just for one person, but for the universal message that Jesus came to teach us from the very beginning. Thank you for joining me this day, and I turn it back over to Amanda.
I walk by faith, each step by faith, to live by faith. I put my trust in you, and I walk by faith, each step by faith, to live by faith. I put my trust in you. Every step I take is a step of faith. No weapon formed against me shall prosper. Every prayer I pray is a prayer of faith. If my God is for me, who can be against me? 'Cause I walk by faith, each step by faith, to live by faith. I put my trust in you, and I walk by faith, each step by faith, to live by faith. I put my trust in you. 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 I put my trust in you.
Thank you, Amanda. And now we're going to take a moment to bless our virtual offering. Those who have received and those who have generously given both electronically and through the mail, to allow us to continue to be with you and to send our message out each and every week. So I invite you to hold your gift in your hand, to lift your heart in gratitude for all we have been given and all we are open to receive. And we bless each of you and your offering with these words: the light of God surrounds us, the love of God enfolds us, the power of God protects us, the presence of God watches over us. Wherever we are, God is, and all is well. Thank you, God. And Amanda and I look forward to seeing you next Sunday morning, right back here at 11 a.m. Thanks for joining us today.